This vessel, the Madeleine's been en route to Gaza now for a number of days. The most recent reports that I saw was that the vessel was just off the coast of Egypt, but clearly heading towards Gaza. So the critical question now is that given the Israelis' consistent position that they will enforce a maritime blockade around Gaza, um, where did this boarding actually take place? Did it take place just off the coast of Gaza within the designated blockade and security zone that Israel controls, or did it actually take place off the coast of Egypt, which would be within Egypt's territorial sea and adjacent territorial waters?
So what are the implications then if the IDF, say, boarded in their own waters? And what are the ramifications legally if they boarded in international waters or those waters that belong to Egypt?
Well, if the boarding took place off the coast of Gaza within the Gazan territorial sea, which Israel subjects to the blockade, well, then that's consistent with the blockade that Israel has in place, which has been in place for many, many years now, which stops both land, sea and air entries into Gaza. And we've seen multiple examples of that occurring over the last year and a half. If, on the other hand, Israel conducted this operation within Egyptian waters or within international waters, as you're calling them, that will raise significant concerns, first of all, for Egypt, but also for the United Kingdom, bearing in mind that this vessel, the Madeleine, is a British-flagged vessel.
Can you tell me, is this, when you look at the marine blockade, is this a legal blockade when you're looking at international law?
Well, Israel will say, of course, that it's an occupying power, and consistent with the Geneva Convention, it can seek to control all movement of persons in and out of Gaza, and it's been doing that for many years. And that stranglehold, if you like, in terms of the implementation of that blockade has even been stronger ever since the October 7, 2023 attacks. The Gaza flotilla would counter by saying, well, actually, what we're trying to do here is land humanitarian aid. And so we get into this whole debate as to who can and cannot deliver aid into Gaza at the moment, consistent with the constraints that Israel is placing in terms of the blockade in and around the territory.
We hear so much, Don, about the land blockade. How does it work? Pretty much well the same, this marine blockade. Can you tell us a little bit of the history about this marine blockade and how far it goes?
Yes, well, Israel's been quite vigilant in terms of enforcing these types of blockades, and perhaps the most significant and violent incident of this type goes back to 2010 when Israeli commandos boarded a Turkish flagged vessel, the Mavi Mara, which resulted in the death of 10 persons on board that particular activist flotilla. So that was a major flashpoint in terms of relations between Israel and Turkey back then. Since then, we haven't seen the sort of high-profile incidents, nothing like the Mavi Mara incident from 2010, but we have seen a number of activist groups seeking to breach the maritime blockade of Gaza. This is the most recent one, and indeed this particular vessel, the Madeleine, has got apparently the closest to the Gazan coast. Of course, we also know that just last year, the Americans tried to build piers off the Gazan coast to try to resupply Gaza with humanitarian aid by ship. That failed because the piers that they built were destroyed by the poor weather.
So if the big question here is where indeed the IDF boarded this vessel, who is going to determine that?
Well, I'm sure that we'll get differing accounts as to where exactly this occurred. You've heard from Matthew Doran that Israel was adopting various tactics to disrupt the communications in and out of the Madeleine. And so there will no doubt be a range of perspectives in terms of where this boarding actually took place. I think it'll be actually quite interesting to see, first of all, what the Egyptians have to say in terms of whether this boarding did take place off the Egyptian coast and within the Egyptian territorial sea. And of course, the British, given that the Madeleine is a British flagged vessel, and Britain will not take very kindly at all to the disruption of the freedom of navigation that this vessel would otherwise be enjoying.
Given it is a UK vessel, Don, how do you expect the UK to get involved? Is there any precedent set? Can you look back into history to work out what course it might take?
Well, I think what we can generally say is that the United Kingdom, as a very major maritime power with a very long history, will not take very kindly to a UK vessel being disrupted in terms of it exercising its freedom of navigation. So it'll be really interesting to see what we hear coming out of London as we approach the morning in London in the next few hours, to see what they've got to say in relation to this matter and what intelligence they have, because no doubt they were also closely monitoring the situation.
And Don, finally, we heard from Matthew Doran there before saying that it is likely that those on board, those activists on board, will be returned home. Do you expect that to be the case?
I would think that to be the case because we have some very high profile persons on that Madeleine crew. Israel will not want to escalate the situation in terms of long-term detention of people like Greta Thunberg. So I'm sure that they will be probably prosecuted very quickly, convicted of relatively minor charges and then deported.